Hello, and welcome to our channel, Stories with Silas. We hope you enjoy watching.
Sarah Martinez had $73 to her name and a 7-year-old daughter who would run out of insulin in 5 days when she chose to keep the diner open for 13 stranded billionaires during the worst blizzard Montana had seen in decades. By sunrise, her decision would bring 100 luxury vehicles to her doorstep and prove that a single act of compassion could rewrite a desperate woman's entire existence. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The silence that would soon blanket Riverside, Montana, was already beginning to whisper through the streets. Sarah Martinez pressed her forehead against the cold window of Betty's diner, watching the first snowflakes spiral down from the darkening sky. The weather forecast had been dire all day, a massive winter storm approaching, the kind that shut down entire towns and left people stranded for days. But Sarah couldn't afford to think about that. Not tonight, not on Christmas Eve, when every tip mattered, when every dollar brought her one step closer to paying for her daughter's next round of medication. She was 28 years old, but the mirror told a different story. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from countless sleepless nights juggling 2 jobs, and her hands bore the calluses of endless dishwashing, table wiping, and floor mopping. Her black hair, usually tied back in a neat ponytail, had begun to show premature strands of grey. Life had aged her in ways that birthdays never could. Sarah's world revolved around one person, her 7-year-old daughter, Emily. Sweet, brave Emily, who fought a daily battle against juvenile diabetes. The medical bills were crushing, an avalanche of numbers that grew larger each month despite Sarah's desperate attempts to keep up. Insurance covered some of it, but the deductibles, the co-pays, the specialized treatments, they added up faster than she could earn. Her modest 1-bedroom apartment in the old part of town was barely affordable, heated by a temperamental furnace that she constantly worried would give out entirely. Betty's diner sat on the edge of Route 89, a relic from the 1950s with its chrome trim, red vinyl booths, and checkerboard floor. The neon sign outside flickered intermittently, casting pink and blue shadows on the snow-dusted parking lot. During the summer months, the diner thrived with tourists passing through on their way to Glacier National Park. But winter was different. Winter was slow, painfully slow, with only locals brave enough to venture out for coffee and pie. Sarah had started working at Betty's 3 years ago, shortly after Emily's diagnosis shattered her previous life. Before that, she'd been pursuing a nursing degree at the community college, dreams of a better future dancing in her head. But chronic illness doesn't wait for anyone to finish their education. She'd dropped out, taken on every shift Betty would give her, and added a second job stocking shelves at the supermart on the highway. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Rest was for people without medical bills piling up on their kitchen counter. Tonight, Betty had already gone home to be with her own family, leaving Sarah to close up alone. It was supposed to be a short shift, just until 8 o'clock, giving her time to pick up Emily from Mrs. Chen's house next door and spend a quiet Christmas Eve together. They'd planned to make hot chocolate, watch their worn VHS copy of A Christmas Story, and pretend that everything was normal, that they weren't one emergency away from complete disaster. But the weather had other plans. The wind had picked up significantly in the last hour, rattling the diner's windows with increasing force. Sarah checked her phone. No messages from Mrs. Chen, which meant Emily was safe and warm. That was what mattered most. The weather app showed an angry red blob moving across the map, heading straight for Riverside. Predicted snowfall, 18 to 24 inches. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Whiteout conditions expected. Sarah glanced at the clock. 6:47 p.m. She should start the closing procedures, wipe down the last few tables, count the register, lock the doors. The dinner rush, such as it was, had ended an hour ago. Only one customer remained. Old Mr. Patterson, nursing his third cup of coffee in the corner booth, in no hurry to return to his lonely house on Maple Street. Then she saw them. Headlights, multiple sets, cutting through the increasing snow like searching beacons. Not just one or two vehicles, but a convoy. Sarah squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. 3 black SUVs, sleek and expensive, the kind that didn't belong in a town like Riverside. They pulled into the parking lot one after another, moving with careful precision despite the deteriorating conditions. The first vehicle's door opened and a man stepped out, immediately pulling his coat tighter against the wind. Even from inside the diner, Sarah could see the quality of his clothing, the kind of tailored perfection that spoke of serious wealth. He glanced up at the diner's flickering sign, then turned to gesture to the other vehicles. Sarah's heart rate quickened. Something told her that her quiet Christmas Eve was about to become very different. She smoothed down her worn apron, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, and prepared to greet what appeared to be the most unexpected customers of her entire waitressing career. The storm was coming, and with it 13 strangers who would change her life in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The bell above the diner's door chimed, and a blast of frigid air swept through the room, causing Mr. Patterson to look up from his coffee. Sarah watched as the man she'd seen first stepped inside, stamping snow from his expensive leather shoes. He was perhaps in his mid-40s, with a neatly trimmed beard touched with grey and dark eyes that scanned the diner with careful assessment. Behind him, more men filed in one after another until 13 of them stood in the small entryway, their breath creating clouds of mist in the sudden temperature change. They were impeccably dressed, every one of them. Dark suits, wool overcoats, silk scarves, the kind of attire that belonged in Manhattan boardrooms, not a roadside diner in rural Montana. But what struck Sarah most was their demeanor. Despite the obvious luxury they represented, they carried themselves with a quiet dignity, speaking in low tones to one another in Arabic, their voices creating a melodic backdrop to the howling wind outside. The first man approached the counter where Sarah stood, offering a polite smile. "Good evening," he said, his English accented but flawless. "I apologize for the intrusion. Are you still serving dinner? We find ourselves in need of a place to wait out this storm." Sarah blinked, momentarily stunned by the surreal nature of the situation. 13 wealthy businessmen. She could tell they were businessmen by the way they carried themselves, by the subtle authority in their posture, seeking refuge in Betty's diner. It was like something from a movie. "Of course," she heard herself say, her professional instincts kicking in despite her bewilderment. "Please, have a seat. I'll get menus for everyone." The man's smile widened slightly, and he turned to his companions, speaking rapidly in Arabic. They responded with nods and began removing their coats, hanging them on the rack near the door. As they settled into the booths, pushing tables together to accommodate their group, Sarah noticed the watches on their wrists, the gold cufflinks, the handcrafted shoes. Each man represented more wealth than she'd probably see in her entire lifetime. Mr. Patterson caught her eye and raised his eyebrows in a silent question. She shrugged, grabbing a stack of laminated menus from behind the counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the group, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, steadily. They were just customers. Wealthy customers, yes, but customers nonetheless. She'd served hundreds of people in this diner. She could handle 13 more. "Welcome to Betty's Diner," she said, distributing menus around the table. "My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink? Coffee, tea, water?" The first man, clearly the leader of the group, gestured to the others. "Coffee would be wonderful for everyone, I think. Perhaps tea as well if you have it. We were traveling from Seattle to Chicago when our pilot informed us that we could not safely continue. The private airfield here in Riverside was the closest available landing site." Sarah's eyes widened. A private plane. Of course, these weren't just wealthy businessmen. They were extraordinarily wealthy, the kind of people who owned jets, who could travel the world without ever setting foot in a commercial airport. "I'll get that coffee right away," she managed, retreating to the safety of the counter. Her mind raced as she prepared the industrial-sized coffee maker. Chicago to Seattle meant business, probably important business, and now they were stranded here, in her diner, while the storm raged outside. Through the window, she could see the snow falling harder now, the flakes so thick they obscured the parking lot lights. The wind shrieked around the building's corners, and somewhere outside, something metallic clanged repeatedly. The storm was intensifying faster than predicted. This wasn't just going to be a rough night, it was going to be dangerous. Sarah carried the coffee pot to the table, filling cups with practiced efficiency. The men thanked her in both English and Arabic, their politeness almost formal. As she worked, she overheard fragments of their conversation, discussions about investments, about international markets, about business opportunities in the Middle East and America. These were clearly men of significant influence. One of them, younger than the others, perhaps in his early 30s, looked up at her as she poured his coffee. "Thank you," he said warmly. "You are very kind to stay open for us during such weather. Many places we passed had already closed." Sarah smiled, though her heart ached at the mention of other closures. She should be closing too. She should be heading home to Emily. But looking at these 13 stranded men, she knew she couldn't just turn them away. It wasn't in her nature. Besides, the tips from a group this size could make a real difference. "It's no trouble," she lied smoothly. "What can I get you gentlemen to eat?" The orders came in a mixture of English and translated requests: burgers, steaks, the meatloaf special, club sandwiches. Sarah scribbled frantically on her notepad, trying to keep track of who wanted what. The leader of the group, who had introduced himself as Mr. Al-Rashid, ordered for several of the men who seemed less comfortable with English, his voice patient and considerate as he translated their preferences. Sarah pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, her mind already organizing the workload ahead. Betty's diner didn't have a cook on staff tonight, it was just her. She'd done kitchen duty plenty of times before, juggling the grill and the fryer while keeping an eye on the dining room. But never for 13 people at once, never during a blizzard, never on Christmas Eve when she should have been home with Emily. She pulled out her phone and quickly texted Mrs. Chen. "Storm got bad. Stuck at work with customers. So sorry. Will get home as soon as I can. Please tell Emily I love her." The response came within seconds. "Don't worry, dear. Emily is fine. We're making cookies. Stay safe. Don't drive in this weather." Sarah blinked back tears, pocketing her phone. Emily would understand. She always did. That child had more grace and patience than most adults, Sarah knew. But it still broke her heart to miss their Christmas Eve tradition. She tied on a clean apron and got to work. The grill sizzled as she laid down burger patties and steaks, the familiar routine helping to calm her nerves. The fryer bubbled with oil, waiting for the basket of fries she was preparing. She moved with practiced efficiency, years of experience guiding her hands, even as her mind wandered. Through the serving window, she could see the men talking animatedly, their earlier tension from being stranded seeming to ease as the warm diner environment embraced them. Mr. Patterson had struck up a conversation with one of them, discussing something about cattle ranching. Apparently the man's family owned extensive livestock operations in Saudi Arabia. The storm continued its assault on the building. Snow piled against the windows in growing drifts, and the wind screamed like a living thing. Sarah checked the weather app again during a brief lull in cooking. The storm had been upgraded to a blizzard warning. Roads were being closed throughout the county. The sheriff's department was advising everyone to stay wherever they were, not to attempt travel under any circumstances. She was truly stuck here. And so were her unexpected guests. Sarah plated the first round of orders and pushed through the doors, balancing 3 plates on her arms with the skill of a veteran waitress. The men looked up appreciatively as she served them, their thanks sincere and warm. She made several more trips, bringing out the rest of their meals, refilling coffee cups, ensuring everyone had what they needed. As she worked, she became aware of their eyes following her, not in any uncomfortable way, but with a kind of attentive observation. They noticed everything, how she moved with quiet efficiency despite being the only person running the entire restaurant, how she maintained her composure even as the storm worsened, how she checked her phone periodically with the expression of concern she tried to hide. "Miss Sarah," Mr. Al-Rashid called as she passed their table. "Please, if you have a moment." She paused, tucking her notepad into her apron pocket. "Yes, sir. Is everything all right with your meals?" Everything is excellent," he assured her. "But we cannot help but notice that you are managing this establishment entirely alone. Where is the rest of the staff?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Oh, it's just me tonight. Christmas Eve, you know. My boss let everyone else go home to be with their families. I was supposed to close at 8, but—" She gestured toward the window, where visibility had dropped to near zero. Well, the storm had other ideas. One of the other men, distinguished-looking with silver hair, leaned forward. "You have family waiting for you?" The question was gentle, but it pierced through Sarah's carefully maintained professional demeanor. Her throat tightened. "My daughter. She's 7. She's with our neighbor right now." "And yet you stayed open to help strangers," the silver-haired man observed, his English bearing a distinct British accent mixed with Arabic inflection. "That is very kind of you, especially on such an important night." Sarah managed a small smile. "You needed help. I couldn't just leave you out in the storm. Besides," she added, trying to lighten the mood, "the tips from a table of 13 will make a difference." She immediately regretted the comment. It sounded mercenary, desperate, but Mr. Al-Rashid simply nodded thoughtfully, exchanging glances with several of the other men. Something unspoken passed between them, a silent communication that Sarah couldn't interpret. "We are very grateful," he said finally. "Please, if there is anything we can do to make your work easier tonight, you must tell us. We are, after all, imposing on your Christmas Eve." "You're not imposing," Sarah insisted, even though they absolutely were. "You're customers. This is what I do." But as she returned to the kitchen to check on the remaining orders, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the room. The men were watching her with a new intensity, a purpose that hadn't been there before. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. 9 o'clock came and went, then 10. The storm showed no signs of relenting. If anything, it grew more ferocious. Snow had completely buried the lower half of the diner's windows, creating an oddly claustrophobic effect. The wind howled so loudly that normal conversation required raised voices. Occasionally the lights would flicker, threatening to plunge them all into darkness. But somehow the power held. Mr. Patterson had finally ventured out around 9:30, declaring he'd rather risk the 3-block walk to his house than spend the night in a booth. Sarah had tried to convince him to stay, but the old rancher was stubborn. She watched anxiously as he disappeared into the white wall of snow, praying he'd make it home safely. Now it was just Sarah and the 13 businessmen, existing in their own isolated world while the blizzard raged outside. She'd long since cleaned up from dinner and had started making fresh coffee, knowing that caffeine and conversation were all she could offer at this point. The kitchen was closed. There was no point in cooking more food, but she kept the coffee flowing and brought out slices of apple pie from the display case. "Please join us," Mr. Al-Rashid said, as she refilled his cup for what must have been the 5th time. "You have been on your feet for hours. You must be exhausted." Sarah hesitated. It felt wrong somehow, sitting with customers, but her feet did ache terribly, and her back throbbed from the constant movement. More importantly, there was nowhere else to go. The diner had become a tiny sanctuary in an Arctic wilderness. Just for a moment, she conceded, sliding into the booth beside the youngest member of the group, who introduced himself as Karim Al-Fahd. Up close, she could see the quality of his watch, a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than her annual salary, maybe more than several years of her salary. "You must tell us about yourself," the silver-haired gentleman said. His name, she'd learned, was Dr. Omar Hussein, a physician and healthcare investor from Dubai. "You mentioned a daughter?" Sarah's face softened immediately, the way it always did when she thought of Emily. "Yes, Emily. She's 7 years old, the smartest, bravest little girl you could ever meet." Her voice caught slightly, and she cleared her throat. "She has juvenile diabetes, type 1. We manage it, but it's—" She trailed off, not wanting to burden these strangers with her problems. "That must be very difficult," Dr. Hussein said gently. "Type 1 diabetes requires constant vigilance, the medications, the monitoring, the dietary restrictions." "You understand it," Sarah said, surprised and relieved to talk to someone who actually knew what the disease entailed. Most people thought diabetes just meant cutting out sugar. The insulin alone costs a fortune, even with insurance, and the continuous glucose monitor she needs. We can't always afford the sensors. Sometimes we have to go back to finger sticks, which she hates. She's so brave about it, but she's just a little girl, you know. The men exchanged looks again, that same silent communication Sarah had noticed earlier. She felt suddenly self-conscious, aware that she'd revealed too much. These were wealthy, successful men. They didn't need to hear about her financial struggles, about rationing medical supplies, about the constant terror that kept her awake at night. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, starting to rise. "I shouldn't be talking about this. Let me get you gentlemen some more." "Please stay," Karim said, his hand gesturing for her to remain seated. "We ask because we truly want to know. Your daughter is lucky to have such a devoted mother." "I'm the lucky one," Sarah replied, her eyes misting. "Emily never complains. She takes her injections, she checks her blood sugar, she follows her meal plan, all without complaint, and she still finds ways to be joyful, to be kind to others. She's teaching me how to be strong." Mr. Al-Rashid leaned forward, his expression serious. "And her father? He helps with her care?" Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Emily's father left when she was 2, before the diagnosis. I haven't heard from him in 5 years. She took a breath, forcing herself to relax. "It's just us, me and Emily against the world." "You work here full-time?" another man asked. Ibrahim Al-Sayed, an oil executive from Abu Dhabi. "Here and at the supermart," Sarah admitted. 2 jobs. Sometimes I pick up shifts at the truck stop diner on Route 12 if they need someone. I do what I have to do." The silence that followed her words was heavy with unspoken emotions. These men, accustomed to luxury and privilege, seemed genuinely moved by her situation. "Doctor," Hussein's eyes held a deep sadness, while Karim looked angry on her behalf. Mr. Al-Rashid's expression was unreadable, but his hands were clasped tightly together, as if wrestling with some internal decision. "The healthcare system in your country," Dr. Hussein began carefully, "it is very different from ours. In the Gulf states, medical care is provided to citizens. To hear that a child must go without proper monitoring equipment because of cost," he shook his head. "This is not right." Sarah managed a weak smile. "That's America for you. We make it work. Emily's alive, she's growing, she's happy. That's what matters." But even as she said the words, exhaustion swept over her like a wave. The late hour, the emotional toll of the conversation, the constant worry about Emily, it all crashed down at once. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears she had no right to shed in front of strangers. "Excuse me," she whispered, rising from the booth. "I should check the stockroom. We might need more supplies if we're going to be here all night." She fled to the back before anyone could respond, pressing her hand against her mouth to muffle the sob that escaped. In the cold stockroom, surrounded by boxes of napkins and industrial-sized cans of vegetables, Sarah finally let herself break down, if only for a moment. When Sarah emerged from the stockroom 5 minutes later, her eyes slightly red but her composure restored, she found that the men had cleared and stacked their own dishes at the end of the table. Several of them were wiping down surfaces with napkins, and Kareem had actually gone behind the counter to start a fresh pot of coffee. "Please," she protested, hurrying toward them, "you don't need to do that. You're customers." "We are human beings taking shelter in a storm," Mr. Al-Rashid interrupted gently, "and you are one person doing the work of many. Allow us to help, Miss Sarah. It is the least we can do." She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was too heavy. Instead, she simply nodded, grateful beyond words. "Thank you," she whispered. Dr. Hussein approached her with a concerned expression. "You should rest." "When did you last sit down for more than a few minutes?" "I'm fine," Sarah insisted automatically, but even as she spoke, her hand went to the small of her back, rubbing at the persistent ache there. "You are not fine," he said, not unkindly. "You are exhausted, worried about your daughter, and you have been working non-stop for hours. Please, sit. We will manage the coffee and anything else that is needed." Before Sarah could protest further, Ibrahim guided her firmly but gently to a booth. "Rest," he commanded. "Doctor's orders even if he is not your doctor." Sarah sank into the vinyl seat, and the moment she did, she realized just how bone-tired she truly was. Her feet throbbed, her back screamed, and her head felt fuzzy from lack of sleep and too much stress. She checked her phone again. 11:47 p.m., nearly midnight on Christmas Eve, and she was trapped in a diner with 13 strangers while her daughter slept at the neighbor's house. A fresh text from Mrs. Chen appeared. "Emily had her bedtime snack and insulin. Blood sugar is 142. Perfect. She's sleeping peacefully. Don't worry about anything here. Stay safe." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. Mrs. Chen was a blessing, a widow in her 70s who treated Emily like the granddaughter she'd never had. Without her, Sarah didn't know how she would have managed any of this. While she sat lost in thought, the businessmen moved about the diner with surprising efficiency. They had clearly decided among themselves to take care of things, and they did so with the same attention to detail they probably applied to their business ventures. The coffee station was organized, tables were cleaned, and one of them, Hassan Al Maktoum, a real estate developer from Qatar, was actually sweeping the floor. Sarah watched in amazement as these men, who probably had servants and assistants handling every detail of their daily lives, performed simple tasks with genuine care. They didn't do it with any sense of condescension or show. They simply did what needed to be done. Mr. Al-Rashid settled into the booth across from her, 2 cups of fresh coffee in his hands. He slid one across to her. "Drink," he said simply. "You need it more than I do." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, grateful for the heat. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why are you all being so kind? You could be demanding to leave, complaining about being stuck here, making my life difficult. But instead we see a woman who chose compassion over convenience," he replied. "You could have closed this restaurant before we arrived. You could have told us to leave, but you stayed. You served us. You gave us warmth and food when we needed it. Why would we respond to such generosity with anything less than gratitude?" "I'm just doing my job," Sarah protested weakly. "No," Mr. Al-Rashid said firmly, "you are doing far more than your job. And in the process, you have reminded us of something important, something that wealth and success can sometimes make us forget." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "That the measure of a person is not in what they have, but in what they give when they have so little to give." Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. She sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Around them, the other men had finished their impromptu cleaning and were settling back into the booths, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a sense of purpose in the room now, a determination that hadn't existed before. She noticed several of them on their phones, texting rapidly in Arabic, making quiet calls. Their voices were too low for her to hear, but there was an urgency to their conversations. Plans were being made, decisions reached. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that these discussions somehow involved her, but she was too tired to puzzle it out. "Miss Sarah," Dr. Hussein called from across the room, "do you have blankets? It will be a long night, and we should all try to rest if we can." Sarah nodded, grateful for something practical to focus on. "There's a storage closet in the back. We keep some emergency supplies there. Tell me where, and I will get them," Karim offered, already standing. She gave him directions, and he disappeared into the back. Moments later, he returned with an armful of old blankets, worn but clean, kept for exactly this kind of emergency. The men distributed them among themselves, and someone offered one to Sarah. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling it around her shoulders. The diner's heater was working overtime, but drafts still crept in around the windows. As midnight passed and Christmas Day officially began, the diner took on an almost dreamlike quality. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, a strange peace had settled over the group. Someone had found the old radio behind the counter, and soft classical music filled the spaces between conversation. The men had arranged themselves in various booths, some dozing lightly, others talking in low voices. Sarah found herself drawn into conversation with Dr. Hussein, who had positioned himself at her booth with a cup of tea. Despite the late hour, he seemed alert, his kind eyes focused on her with genuine interest. "My youngest daughter has asthma," he said quietly. "Not the same as diabetes, of course, but I understand what it is to watch your child struggle with a chronic condition, the fear, the constant vigilance." Sarah looked up, surprised. "I didn't know you had children." "5, he said with a warm smile. 3 sons, 2 daughters. My youngest, Layla, she is 9. When she has an attack, even with all my medical knowledge, all my resources, I feel helpless. So I can only imagine what you experience, doing this alone, without the safety net of wealth." "You learn to cope," Sarah said softly. "You learn to be grateful for the good days and survive the bad ones." "But you shouldn't have to just survive," Dr. Hussein replied. "You and Emily, you should be able to thrive." Before Sarah could respond, Mr. Al-Rashid joined them, settling into the booth with a thoughtful expression. "Forgive me for asking, Miss Sarah, but where do you live? Is it far from here?" "About 3 miles, Sarah answered. "A small apartment complex on the east side of town. Nothing fancy, but it's home." "And the medical facilities? Where does Emily receive her care?" "There's a clinic in town for regular checkups," Sarah explained. "For emergencies, we have to go to Great Falls. That's about an hour away. We went there when she was first diagnosed. The doctors there, they saved her life." Her voice caught with emotion. "I'll never forget that. Never forget the people who helped us when we needed it most." Mr. Al-Rashid and Dr. Hussein exchanged one of those meaningful glances again. Sarah was beginning to recognize that look. It meant they were planning something, deciding something. But what? Karim approached with fresh coffee for everyone, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable in any environment. He slid into the booth beside Mr. Al-Rashid, his young face serious. "The pilots report that the storm should break by dawn. The roads will need clearing, but by mid-morning, travel should be possible." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and strange disappointment at the news. Relief that she could finally get home to Emily, but disappointment that this odd, intense experience was coming to an end. These men had shown her a kindness she hadn't expected, a respect that went far beyond the typical customer-server relationship. "Miss Sarah," Karim said, turning to her, "may I ask you something personal?" She tensed slightly but nodded. "Of course." "If you could give Emily one thing, anything at all, what would it be?" The question caught her off guard. She thought for a long moment, her mind racing through the countless things Emily needed. Better insurance, more medication, the latest glucose monitor, a college fund. But those weren't really what Emily needed most. "Stability," Sarah finally said. "I would give her stability. The knowledge that she'll always have what she needs, medically, that she won't have to worry about whether we can afford her next prescription or her next doctor's visit. I would give her the freedom to just be a kid, without the constant anxiety that I know she feels, even though she tries to hide it from me." Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "She knows we struggle. She's 7 years old, and she knows. She asked me last week if she could skip her birthday party this year to help save money. A 7-year-old shouldn't be thinking about saving money for her own medical care." The silence that followed was profound. Even the men in the other booths had grown quiet, listening. Sarah realized she'd revealed more than she intended, opened herself up in a way she rarely did with anyone. But something about this night, this storm, these unexpected companions, it had broken down her usual walls. "I'm sorry," she said, embarrassed. "I don't usually talk this much about our situation. You must think I'm—" "We think you are remarkable," Mr. Al-Rashid interrupted gently. "We think Emily is blessed to have you as her mother. And we think—" He paused, glancing at the other men, who all nodded encouragingly. "We think that perhaps Allah has brought us together tonight for a reason." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "What do you mean?" Mr. Al-Rashid smiled, but it was a mysterious smile, one that held secrets. "All will be revealed in time, Miss Sarah. For now, try to rest. You have given us shelter from the storm. Allow us to give you something in return. Peace of mind, at least for tonight. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you and Emily are not alone anymore." Sarah didn't remember falling asleep, but she woke to the sound of hushed voices speaking in Arabic and the strange realization that someone had draped an additional blanket over her. The classical music still played softly from the radio, but the howling wind had diminished to a low moan. Through the partially snow-covered windows, she could see the faintest hint of grey light breaking through the darkness. Dawn. Christmas morning. She sat up slowly, her back protesting every movement. The diner's clock read 5:43 a.m. Around her, the businessmen were already awake, several of them on their phones again, speaking in urgent but quiet tones. They noticed her stirring, and immediately Karim appeared with a fresh cup of coffee. "Good morning," he said with a gentle smile. "Merry Christmas, Miss Sarah." "Merry Christmas," she replied, her voice rough with sleep. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm ceramic. "The storm—" "Breaking up," Ibrahim confirmed from across the room. "The worst has passed. Snowplows are already working on the main roads. We should be able to leave within the hour." Sarah felt her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Relief, certainly. She could finally get home to Emily. But also something else. Sadness, perhaps. This strange, intimate night had created a bond she hadn't expected. These men had seen her at her most vulnerable, had shown her kindness without expectation of anything in return. And now they would disappear back into their world of private jets and international business, and she would return to her double shifts and medical bills. "You must be eager to see your daughter," Dr. Hussein said, joining her booth with his own cup of tea. I am, Sarah admitted. I hate being away from her, especially on Christmas. She's probably wondering where I am. Mrs. Chen sent you a message, Dr. Hussein said, gesturing to her phone. About 20 minutes ago. I heard it buzz, but didn't want to wake you. Sarah quickly grabbed her phone. The message read, Emily awake and excited. She says Santa came. Don't rush in bad weather. We're making Christmas breakfast. Love you both. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. Even without her mother there, Emily was having a Christmas morning. Mrs. Chen was making sure of that. The woman was an angel. Mr. Al-Rashid approached their booth, and Sarah noticed he carried a leather portfolio she hadn't seen before. His expression was serious but warm, and behind him the other men had gathered, forming a semicircle. There was a formality to their arrangement that made Sarah's pulse quicken. Miss Sarah, Mr. Al-Rashid began, before we part ways, we would like to have a conversation with you. Would you permit us a few moments of your time? Sarah nodded, confusion and curiosity warring within her. Of course. He settled into the booth across from her, placing the portfolio on the table. The other men remained standing, their faces solemn. Last night, Mr. Al-Rashid continued, you opened your establishment to 13 strangers when you could have closed your doors. You worked through the night to ensure our comfort, despite your own exhaustion and worry for your child. You asked nothing of us, expected nothing from us. I was just doing my job, Sarah protested, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. No, Dr. Hussein interjected, you did far more than your job required. You showed us genuine hospitality, genuine kindness. In our culture, such hospitality is sacred. It creates obligations, not burdens, but sacred duties. Sarah's hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. I don't understand. Mr. Al-Rashid leaned forward. Throughout the night, we have been making calls, having discussions. We have learned more about your situation, about Emily's condition, about your struggles. Please do not be alarmed. We asked only questions that concerned your well-being, and what we learned troubled us deeply. We are businessmen, Hassan added, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to making important decisions. We are also fathers, uncles, brothers. We cannot stand by and watch a woman of your character, a child of Emily's circumstances, struggle when we have the means to help. Sarah's heart was pounding now. What are you saying? Mr. Al-Rashid opened the portfolio and withdrew several documents. We are saying that we would like to help, if you will permit us. But we must ask your permission first, because what we propose will change your life considerably. I can't accept charity, Sarah stammered, though part of her desperately wanted to know what they were offering. I appreciate your kindness, but I can't. This is not charity, Karim interrupted gently. This is gratitude. This is respect. This is 13 men who were shown kindness when they needed it, choosing to return that kindness in the way they know best. The grey light outside was growing stronger, painting the snow-covered world in shades of silver and white. Inside the diner, Sarah sat surrounded by men who had been strangers 12 hours ago, but who now looked at her with such genuine concern and determination that she felt her resistance beginning to crumble. Tell me, she whispered, tell me what you're proposing. Mr. Al-Rashid slid the first document across the table. Sarah stared at it, unable to process the numbers she was seeing. It was a trust fund document, professionally prepared despite the late hour, with Emily Martinez listed as the primary beneficiary. $2 million, Mr. Al-Rashid said quietly, held in trust for Emily's medical care and education. The fund will cover all her diabetes-related expenses, insulin, monitoring equipment, doctor visits, everything, for the rest of her life. Whatever remains after her medical needs are met will go toward her education, her future. Sarah's vision blurred. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. $2 million. It was more money than she could comprehend, more than she would earn in several lifetimes of waitressing. That's impossible, she finally whispered. I can't accept that. That's too much. That is 13 men contributing because we choose to, Dr. Hussein said firmly. Each of us has committed to this fund. It is established, Miss Sarah. The papers are ready for your signature. Emily will never have to worry about affording her medication again. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but Mr. Al-Rashid wasn't finished. He slid another document across the table. We have also taken the liberty of contacting several properties in Riverside. There is a 3-bedroom house on Willow Street, recently renovated with a backyard. We have purchased it in your name. You and Emily will have a real home with space and stability. No, Sarah sobbed, shaking her head. No, this is too much. Why would you? How could I? Because you were kind when you didn't have to be, Kareem said, his own eyes glistening. Because you worked through the night for strangers. Because you deserve better than barely surviving. But there's more, Hassan added, and Sarah thought she might actually faint. What more could there possibly be? Mr. Al-Rashid gestured toward the window, where the first rays of true sunlight were beginning to break through the dissipating clouds. In a few hours, when the roads are clear, deliveries will begin arriving at your new home. Each of us has arranged to send you a vehicle, not as payment, but as a gift. 13 vehicles, one from each of us. Sarah's mind reeled. Vehicles? I don't understand. Luxury vehicles, Ibrahim clarified, each worth considerable value. We understand you may not need 13 cars, Miss Sarah. Most of them you will likely choose to sell. The proceeds from those sales will provide you with financial security, an investment portfolio, savings for Emily's future, the freedom to stop working 2 jobs if you choose. We calculated conservatively, another businessman added, Rashid Al-Zahrani, an investment banker from Kuwait. The vehicle's combined value should be approximately $8 to $10 million. After taxes and sales, you would clear enough to live comfortably, to focus on Emily, to perhaps return to school, if that is still your dream. Sarah couldn't process the numbers. 8 to 10 million, plus 2 million in the trust, plus a house. It was insane. It was impossible. It was too much. Why? She choked out. Why would you do this for someone you just met? Mr. Al-Rashid reached across the table and gently took her hand. Because in my culture, Miss Sarah, hospitality is sacred. A host who opens their door to a stranger is blessed, and those who receive that hospitality incur a sacred debt, not a burden but an honor. You gave us shelter when we needed it. You worked through the night for us. You sacrificed your Christmas Eve with your daughter for strangers. That was everything, Dr. Hussein interrupted. That was the measure of your character. And we are blessed to have the means to respond in kind. We have been given much in this life, Miss Sarah. It is our duty, our privilege, to give back when we encounter someone truly deserving. But I'm just a waitress, Sarah protested weakly. You are a mother fighting for her child's life, Kareem said softly. You are a woman of dignity and grace despite your struggles. You're exactly the kind of person who deserves help, who deserves the chance to thrive instead of merely survive. The sun broke fully through the clouds outside, flooding the diner with golden light. Sarah sat in that light, surrounded by 13 men who had walked into her life during a blizzard and were now offering her a miracle she never could have imagined. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Mr. Al-Rashid replied gently. Say yes and let us do this. Say yes and give Emily the life she deserves. Say yes and accept what is freely given with love and respect." Sarah looked down at the documents through her tears, then back up at the 13 faces watching her with such hope and kindness. Every practical part of her brain screamed that this couldn't be real, that people didn't just give away millions of dollars to strangers. But her heart knew differently. Her heart recognized the truth in their words, the sincerity in their eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, her voice breaking with emotion, "Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much." The men erupted in smiles, several speaking excitedly in Arabic. Mr. Al-Rashid came around the table and helped Sarah to her feet, embracing her like a father would embrace a daughter. "You have given us a great gift, Miss Sarah. You have reminded us why our wealth matters, not for what it can buy us, but for what it allows us to give to others." The next hour passed in a blur of signatures, phone calls, and tearful gratitude. Dr. Hussein arranged for a car service to take Sarah home. Her old sedan wouldn't start in the cold anyway. The men insisted she take the documents with her, along with business cards bearing personal phone numbers. "If you or Emily ever need anything," Kareem said, pressing his card into her hand, "anything at all, we are family now." By 8 o'clock, the roads were passable. Sarah stood outside the diner with her new family, for that's what they had become, saying goodbyes that felt more like, "until we meet again." Each man embraced her, some with tears in their own eyes. They would return to their jet, to their business dealings, to their lives of luxury. But they would carry this night with them forever, just as she would. The car service dropped Sarah at Mrs. Chen's house. She practically ran to the door, her heart bursting with the need to hold her daughter. Mrs. Chen opened it before she could knock, Emily visible behind her in flannel pajamas covered in snowflakes. "Mama!" Emily cried, launching herself into Sarah's arms. Sarah collapsed to her knees, holding her daughter tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Merry Christmas, baby. Merry Christmas." "Santa came, Mama, even with the storm. Mrs. Chen said you got stuck at work helping people, but you're a hero for staying to help them." Sarah laughed through her tears. "No, sweetie. They were the heroes. They helped us." Mrs. Chen pulled Sarah inside, concern etched on her weathered face. "My dear, you look exhausted. Come, sit. I'll make tea and you can tell me everything." But before Sarah could explain, her phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Al-Rashid. "The deliveries begin at noon. We wanted to give you time with Emily first. We hope you will forgive us. We may have been more generous than we initially indicated. Each of us is sending multiple vehicles. Consider it an early birthday present for Emily, for many birthdays to come." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the message again. Multiple vehicles, each of them. That would mean, at precisely noon, the first transport carrier arrived on their quiet street. Then another, and another. Neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the spectacle. Massive car carriers, the kind that transported vehicles to dealerships, began unloading luxury cars one by one. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Lexus, Audi, Range Rover, Porsche, Tesla. The list went on. Sarah stood in the front yard of the house that was now hers, the 3-bedroom on Willow Street, hastily transferred that morning through expedited paperwork, watching in disbelief as the convoy continued. Emily clung to her hand, eyes wide with wonder. Mrs. Chen stood beside them, crying openly. "Mama, why are all these cars coming to our house?" Emily asked. "Because sometimes," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "when you help people, they help you back. And sometimes miracles happen on Christmas." By the time the deliveries stopped, 100 vehicles lined the streets surrounding their new home. The entire neighborhood had gathered, watching the impossible unfold. Someone had called the local news, and cameras were already arriving. Sarah didn't care. She knelt beside Emily, holding her close, watching the sunlight glint off 100 windshields. "We're going to be okay, baby," she whispered. "We're going to be more than okay." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the backyard of her home on Willow Street, watching Emily play with her new puppy, a golden retriever named Lucky, gifted by Kareem on his last visit to Montana. The continuous glucose monitor on Emily's arm beeped softly, a sound that once filled Sarah with anxiety, but now brought only relief. Emily's numbers had been stable for weeks. Her A1C levels the best they'd ever been. Access to the latest technology and the best endocrinologists had transformed her daughter's health. The vehicles had sold for even more than projected, $12 million after taxes. Sarah had kept just two, a practical SUV for daily use and a reliable sedan. The rest of the money sat in carefully managed investment accounts, generating enough income that Sarah no longer worked at Betty's diner or the supermart. Instead, she'd enrolled at the community college, finally pursuing her nursing degree. She would graduate next spring, but the greatest change wasn't financial, it was the connections they'd forged. The 13 men had become true family. They visited when business brought them to the States. They video-called Emily on her birthday, her diabetes diagnosis anniversary, random Tuesday afternoons when they simply wanted to check in. Dr. Hussein had even arranged for Emily to meet specialists at his hospital in Dubai, where she'd received cutting-edge treatment that wasn't yet available in the US. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Al-Rashid. "We will be in Montana next week. I trust you and Emily will join us for dinner. I have someone I'd like you to meet, a young woman who just opened her first restaurant. She could use advice from someone who understands hospitality." Sarah smiled, typing back her acceptance. This was how it worked now. The men didn't just give money, they connected people, created opportunities, opened doors, and Sarah had learned to pay it forward. She'd established a foundation of her own, modest compared to their wealth, but meaningful. The Sarah and Emily Martinez Foundation provided financial assistance to single parents struggling with children's chronic illnesses. She personally met with each family, understanding their fears and hopes in a way only someone who'd lived it could. Last month, she'd helped a single father afford his son's leukemia treatments. The gratitude in his eyes had reminded her of herself 6 months ago. Betty's diner still stood on Route 89, though Betty had surprised everyone by selling it to Sarah at a generous price. Sarah had renovated it, keeping its classic charm, but updating everything else. She'd renamed it The Shelter, a place where everyone was welcome, where kindness was the currency that mattered most. A portion of profits went to her foundation. The walls now displayed photos of her 13 benefactors, with a placard that read, "In honor of 13 strangers who became family during a Christmas storm." Emily ran up to her now, cheeks flushed with joy, Lucky bounding beside her. "Mama, can we make cookies? Mr. Al-Rashid said he wants to try your recipe when he visits." Sarah laughed, gathering her daughter close. Emily's insulin pump was visible beneath her t-shirt, no longer something to hide or fear, but simply part of who she was. A healthy, thriving, joyful child who would never again worry about whether they could afford her next prescription. "Of course, baby. We'll make extra. Enough to share." As they walked toward the house together, Sarah paused to look back at the neighborhood that had witnessed their miracle. The story had made national news. Waitress receives 100 luxury cars from grateful billionaires. But what the headlines missed was the deeper truth. This wasn't about cars or money. It was about human connection, about recognizing the sacred nature of kindness, about 13 men who understood that wealth meant nothing if not shared with those who needed it most. That Christmas Eve blizzard had trapped them all together for one night, but it had created bonds that would last a lifetime. Sarah had given them shelter from a storm. They had given her and Emily shelter from a life of struggle and fear. Sometimes, she thought, as snowflakes began to fall gently from the Montana sky, the greatest miracles come disguised as ordinary moments. A stranded traveler, an open door, a waitress who chose compassion over convenience. And sometimes, those miracles change everything. And so concludes the story of how Sarah Martinez, a struggling single mother and waitress, sheltered 13 Arab billionaires during a Christmas Eve blizzard and found her life transformed by their extraordinary gratitude. Her simple act of keeping the diner open, of working through the night to ensure their comfort, became the catalyst for a miracle that changed not just her life and Emily's, but countless other families through the foundation she created. From viral news coverage to lasting friendships that spanned continents, Sarah's journey reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the kindness we show to strangers and the connections we forge with fellow human beings. Thank you for reading. If you enjoyed this story, remember that acts of kindness, no matter how small, ripple outward in ways we can never predict. Whether you're serving coffee at a diner or running a multinational corporation, the choice to show compassion can change lives. Sarah chose kindness when she could have closed her doors. 13 men chose gratitude when they could have simply moved on. And together they created something beautiful. Your voice matters, your kindness matters, and you never know when a simple act of humanity might become someone else's miracle.